Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about electronic group sets. Currently, I do not own an electronic group set, but I am looking to buy one. So I'm going to be taking you through my decision when choosing between SRAM, Rival, Etap, Axis, or Shimano 105 Di2. So let's jump straight in. So let me give you a bit of background first. I'm upgrading my Trek Domane AL3 from Shimano Sora, which is a 9-speed mechanical disc brake group set. These new group sets are both electronic and have hydraulic brakes and are 12-speed. So regardless of which one I choose, I'll still be getting a pretty banging upgrade. So mostly I'm going to be using it for road riding, but I do plan on getting a second wheel set so I can put on a thicker set of tires and use it for some light gravel roads. But mainly the focus is road riding. I'll be riding solo around the English countryside, so it's not too hilly, and I probably won't be hitting any ridiculous high speeds, so a good choice of gear ratios is important to me. So before we get into it properly, I just want to explain why someone would want to upgrade to an electronic group set. So it's supposed to be a lot easier to maintain because there's no physical cables involved. You don't have to adjust your rear derailleur or front derailleur to compensate for cable stretch, for example. So in theory, it should remain perfectly indexed forever. It's also a lot easier to shift with an electronic group set. With a mechanical one, you have to hold your finger like this and then swing it a whole inch or so. But with a electronic group set, you literally just tap the button and that's it. So it's supposed to be much easier. I really don't see that as much of an advantage, but I can imagine in the winter when it's really cold, you don't really want to move that much. The front derailleur will also adjust its position based on where the rear derailleur is. So this should prevent any chain rub, which will make your bike quieter. An electronic group set is supposed to be a lot easier to install as well because you don't have as many cables running from your handlebars through your frame. So that's one thing to consider as well. All right, the last advantage is that you can see what gear you're in on your bike computer. Some people probably won't care about this and think it's a bit of a waste of time, but I think it's quite cool. And then after your ride, you can see which gear you spent the most amount of time in and stuff like that. So let's be fair and talk about some negatives as well. So obviously they are horrifically expensive, often costing double what a mechanical group set would. If something goes wrong with an electronic group set, it's probably going to be a lot harder to fix than it would be on a mechanical group set. It's probably something you're going to have to take to a bike shop or something to fix rather than just being able to do yourself. All right, that's the introduction done. Let's get into the comparison between the two group sets and see which one I'm gonna go for. So by the end of this video, I'm actually gonna buy one, so stick around to see which one I choose. All right, first up, let's talk about the price. So this is obviously very important for most of us. The recommended retail price for SRAM Etap Axis is £1,400, and for Shimano 105 Di2 it is £1,700. This is a lot of money, so I did some searching around to see if I could find some better deals, and I found some pretty good ones actually. The best deal I could find for SRAM was €1,006, which is about £860, which I thought was a pretty good deal. This came with a power meter as well, which is definitely a good tick for them. And for the Shimano 105, the best deal I could find was, let me check, £949, but that did not come with a power meter, so straight away SRAM gets a couple points there. All right, next up is the weight. So both of these group sets are considered to be pretty heavy compared to mechanical ones. So SRAM comes in at 3,109 grams, and that's with a 46-33 on the front and 11-33 on the back, which is pretty heavy. Shimano 105 Di2 is a bit lighter, coming in at about 2,995 grams. So that's 100 grams lighter, which again, really doesn't mean much to me. My bike's already pretty heavy, so I'm not too fussed about the weight. So for me, not an important factor. Right. Next up is the gear range flexibility. So on SRAM Rival, you get a lot more choice of gear ranges. In terms of crankset, you can choose between 3 different ones, the biggest being a 48-35, the smallest being a 43-30, which is a pretty small chainring actually. And for the cassettes, you get a bit less choice. You can only choose between 2, which is a 10-30 or a 10-36. So for Shimano, the cranksets you can choose between are a bit bigger. They are a 52-36 or a 50-34. And in the rear, you can choose between 11-34 or an 11-36, so not quite as much choice as with SRAM. It's worth noting that the SRAM cassettes go smaller than the Shimano ones. So on a Shimano setup, the highest speed gear you can have is a 52-11, which might seem a lot more than SRAM, but it actually turns out to be pretty similar to a 48-10. So you might initially think you won't get the high speeds you want with the SRAM setup, but actually it works out to be pretty similar in the end. In terms of flexibility here, I'm a pretty big guy and I like climbing, so I really wanted to be able to have a very low gear ratio. Both of them offer the 1-to-1 gear ratio, which is the sweet spot for me. But I do like that SRAM offers you a bit more flexibility with a larger cassette on the back. You can actually go for a much lower than 1-to-1 ratio with SRAM. So for me, the sweet spot here, I think, is the SRAM one. I can have a 43-30 on the front and then a 10-30 on my road wheel set. But then if I wanted something a bit easier on my gravel wheel set, for example, I could put the 10-36 on, and that would allow me even more headroom for some really gnarly gravel climbs. All right, let's go on to the shifting performance. So when I was researching online, a lot of people said that SRAM front derailleur shifting is really bad and they have lots of chain drops. But then again, there were lots of people saying they just installed their front derailleur really badly, so I'm not sure what to make of all this. However, when it comes to Shimano, people just said generally the shifting all around is really good on Shimano, so that's definitely 1 point to Shimano there. However, in terms of shifting speed, I found this video and it actually showed that SRAM shifts quite a bit faster than Shimano, so that's pretty objective. If you say Shimano has faster shifting, then apparently you're just wrong. All right, let's move on to braking performance. So it is pretty hard to give a point here because braking is very subjective. It depends on how you like your brakes to feel. So for this one, I'm not gonna comment on it until I've actually tried it myself. I know for sure that both of these have hydraulic disc brakes, which are going to be a huge upgrade from my mechanical disc brakes, so I don't think either of these would make a difference, to be honest. Okay, installation. Now, this is a pretty important one for me because I'm going to be taking my old group set off my bike and reinstalling it completely myself. If you're taking it to a bike shop, obviously this doesn't matter to you, but for me it's pretty important. So I was watching a video on how to install Shimano 105 Di2, and it looks like a proper hassle, basically. There's so many cables running from the seat post, because that's where the battery is, down through the bottom bracket towards the rear derailleur and to the front derailleur. Basically, there are a lot of wires. I assumed that both of these would be really easy to install because it's electronic, so it's supposed to be wireless. So SRAM is actually the only one that is truly wireless. Between the rear derailleur, front derailleur and the shifters, there are 0 wires whatsoever. So the only cables you need to run through your bikes are for the brake lines, and that is a hell of a lot easier than what Shimano wants you to do. So for that reason, SRAM definitely get a point for me. All right, next up is battery performance. So I looked on both their websites and they both claim that you can get 1,000 kilometers out of one battery charge, which is pretty decent. The only difference here is how the batteries are charged. With the Shimano setup, you need to have a cable running to your bike. The battery isn't removable, so depending on where you store your bike, this could be a bit annoying. You need to make sure you have an outlet like in your garage or something like that, or you have to take your bike inside, which personally seems a bit silly to me. On SRAM, you have 2 batteries instead of 1. One of them is on the front derailleur, one of them is on the rear derailleur. You take these batteries off and you just bring them inside to the charging point, which I think is a lot easier for most people. Rather than having to run a cable all the way to your bike, you simply take the batteries off and charge them where you'd charge all your other electronics. If one of the batteries runs out as well, you can also swap them. So say, for example, your rear derailleur runs out of battery, you can swap it with the front derailleur one to make sure you have rear shifting, which is probably more useful to most people than front shifting. All right, next section is ergonomics. Obviously, I've not actually tried these group sets myself, so I can't actually judge on how they feel, but there is one objective point I want to make. On the Shimano ones, on each shifter, you have 2 buttons, and on SRAM you have 1, so the shifting is slightly different. On Shimano, the right hand side, I believe, I haven't ridden a bike for ages, is it the right hand side or the left hand side? Anyway, how they shift is a bit different. On Shimano, each shifter has 2 buttons, and this will either move the rear derailleur or the front derailleur up or down, so 4 buttons in total, 2 on each side. On SRAM, you only have 1 button on each shifter. So to shift up, you'd click the right-hand side, and to shift down, you'd click on the left-hand side, and then to shift the front derailleur, you'd click both at the same time. So this is very different to the Shimano one, but I do see this as a bit of an advantage as well. So if it's really cold and you're wearing thick gloves in the winter, for example, it could be quite hard to press the correct button on the Shimano one because the buttons are so close. Whereas on the SRAM shifters, there's only 1 button to press on each side, so it's impossible to click the wrong one. So again, that's an advantage for SRAM in my case. All right, next up is the looks. And apparently this is a big issue for some people. There are huge forum debates about which one looks better. And to be honest, I really don't care, so I'm not factoring this in at all. The only difference worth noting is that on SRAM, you have a battery on the front derailleur and the rear derailleur, so it might look a bit bulky to some people. And on the Shimano one, you don't have that, so it might look a little bit smoother. But like I said, I really don't care. All right, next up, let's talk about the power meter. This is a big elephant in the room because for the deals which I found, the Shimano one does not come with a power meter and the SRAM one does. So that's a huge advantage for SRAM because I do not want to spend a lot of money on another power meter. So having one included is great and it saves me a lot of money. All right, we're almost at the end now. So Both of these are electronic, so they need to be set up using an app. And from what I've read on the internet is both of them are fine and work okay, but the SRAM one is a bit better. Again, this isn't my opinion, it's just what I've read online. So when I do finally get my hands on whichever one I choose, I will definitely go through the app and tell you what I think of it. All right, finally, there's two more things I want to mention that didn't really fit into any of the other categories. With the SRAM Groupset, you do get something called satellite shifting, which means you can install these little blips onto your bike, which means you can shift if your hands are in other positions. This could be useful if you, for example, use aero bars or something like that. This isn't particularly important to me at the moment, but I did want to do a triathlon later in the year, so I might actually find it quite useful when I want to shift from the aero bars, but at the moment, not a big deal for me. And finally, one last point in favor of Shimano is that it is compatible with my current wheels. So I'm currently on Shimano Sora. If I move to SRAM, I have to change my hubs to be compatible with SRAM cassettes, which is a bit of a hassle. So yeah, that's the main thing stopping me from going to SRAM. It would cost a bit of money, or I would just have to buy a completely new wheel set. All right, that's it really. So what do you think I went with? It seems there are a lot of points in favor of SRAM, but having to buy new wheel sets to move there does seem like a lot of hassle. So in the end, I did actually end up going with the SRAM Groupset. The main reason for this is that it was a lot cheaper and did include a power meter. So with the money I saved from that, I can easily afford to change the hubs on my wheels, so that's not a big problem at all. I also really do care about how much easier it is to install. I'm not a professional by any means. This is the first time I'm going to be taking apart my bike to this extent, so being able to install it easily is a big factor for me. So yeah, anyway, I've already bought this group set. It's on the way. I'll probably be installing it next month, I reckon, so stick around to see how that installation goes. I'll be doing a full install video if you're interested. I'll also be doing an unboxing as well, because it seems there are not many group set unboxings on the internet. So if you want to see that, be sure to stick around, and I will see you in the next one. All right, peace out.